Hello everybody, my name is Mike Geig and welcome to another live Unity stream. Today we are competing with E3 and so our turnout is a little less than normal, but at least that'll mean the chat will be less crowded and you guys can ask more questions. So today's topic is throwable teleporters, and I had a lot of people online say, what the heck is a throwable teleporter? And basically a throwable teleporter is kind of what it sounds like. It's an object that you could throw, and then you teleport to it, or your player teleports to it. And the whole idea behind it is it's based in maybe like old Unreal Tournament. I loved that game a long time ago, and it had this throwable teleporter. I thought that was like the coolest thing ever. So I decided to make a video today on exactly how to do that. Now, before we start, as always, I'm going to go ahead and plug Twitter. So if questions, comments, concerns, whatever, you can follow us at Unity3D, at Mike Geig, which is me, at Will Goldstone, and at the Ant Ranch. Yeah, I was hoping it wouldn't come through on the video. I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, so my nose is a little stuffy, so hopefully that's not too much of a problem as we go on, but yeah, is what it is, right? Show must go on. Okay, so as far as throwable teleporters, I went ahead and made myself a little graphic here to kind of illustrate what it was that I was talking about. And it's this device that you can throw, and then, you know, when it settles or when it hits the ground or something, it teleports you there. The big problem, because this seems really simple, right? You throw an object, and then you just move the player to where the object is. And that seems like a pretty straightforward thing to do. The problem is that if a teleporter happens to be smaller than the player will end up being stuck in whatever object they teleport to, right? If the teleporter is sitting on the floor and the player teleports to the teleporter, the player will be halfway in the floor, and that's a problem. And so what we need to do is we need to come up with a system for managing how we actually position the player once the teleporter's location has been decided. And so what I've done is I've actually come up with 3 solutions. So we're going to look at all 3 today, and each of them have their own pros and cons, and if you're using this in a game, it'll be pretty much entirely up to you to determine which teleportation method you prefer. Alright, so let's say goodbye to my image here. And so the first thing is I have a scene here. This is just a little obstacle course I built. It's using the Mechanim demonstration flooring, which you can get from the asset store. You can type in Mechanim in the asset store. I think it's like Mechanim 2013 or something like that. Demonstration. That's this flooring here. I also downloaded the sample assets. That's where we're going to get our first-person character controller. And I found this asset pack called Bakery on the asset store, and that's what we're going to use to make our teleporter. I actually found a waffle model, and I thought we're going to throw a waffle and teleport to the waffle, and so that seems pretty reasonable. We will throw waffles and we will teleport. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to go ahead and make my teleporter. All right, and my teleporter is going to be a waffle. Now, in this case, the waffle itself is got kind of a weird angle. It's just how it was modeled. It's all kind of sideways and kind of peculiar, so we can't really use it like that. If you have your own model that's flat, you can kind of skip this step, or you know, whatever you end up doing. But I have this weird angled waffle, so I really need to straighten that out. And since I don't have access to like Blender to straighten it out there, I'm just going to do it in Unity. I'm going to create an empty game object, and I'm going to name it waffle. And I'm going to nest this child waffle model under it, and then position it at 0, 0, 0 with a rotation of 0, 0. Now to get my waffle how I want it, I'm actually going to go into isometric mode, align myself on an axis and go isometric mode. Just like this, and then just kind of tweak it until it's about right. It doesn't need to be perfect. You're not really going to be able to tell because we're just going to be tossing it. It's a waffle. So, and I'll just make sure, yeah, that looks alright. And I'll just come back out of isometric mode, and there we go. So we have our flat waffle, and that's how, that's good enough for now. Alright, Is chat screwy? Some people are talking about chat here. For those of you wondering, we have 194 people in the room. So a lot of people are talking about how many people are in the room. Chat is working. I can see what you're all typing. So, yeah, I don't know. If we get time, can we throw in an explosion? Possibly. Possibly, if we have time. But we have a lot to cover. Okay, so since this is going to be a throwable object, we want to add a rigid body to it for sure, and we're going to want to put a collider on it as well. And so with my parent waffle selected here, I'm going to go to Add Component, Physics, Rigid Body, and I can leave all the basic stuff. That's all fine. I'm also going to Add Component, Physics, Box Collider. I'm doing a box collider because it's simple, right? It's a box, right? That's all I really need. We're not going for super accurate collision here. Now it is a lot bigger than what I need, so I'm actually going to go with something like say 0.4, 0.4, 0.4, and it's still kind of bigger than I need. You'll also notice that the waffle isn't in the center of it. That's because this is a weird waffle model. If you're using just like a sphere or a cube or anything, you won't have this strange offset. But and actually, you know what? I can even go maybe say 0.3. It doesn't matter. Just basically, it's this volume that we're gonna be tossing around. We could probably go smaller with it, but that should be sufficient for now. So we have a box collider and we have a rigid body on this, so we can go ahead and just save this. So I'm gonna create a folder called prefabs. I'm gonna open that folder and I'm gonna drag my waffle into it. There we go. I also have this finished folder. That's my cheating folder. I'm actually gonna delete that. Goodbye, cheating folder. Alright, so we have a prefab waffle and I can go ahead and delete it now. The next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to put a first-person character controller into our game. Because that's going to be our player, that's going to be who's throwing the waffle. And so I'm going to go into Sample Assets, Characters, First-Person Character, Prefab, and I'm just going to grab the first-person character, and I'll put it on top of this little cube here that I have set aside. Alright. Now we have our character. All we need is we need a script that's going to allow our character to throw a waffle. Alright. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder. And we'll call this one Scripts. And I will create a script called Toss Script. Oops. Toss Script. Yeah. There we go. And I'll go ahead and put that on my first person character controller. So Toss Script is basically what's going to control how we throw. You can see I have a little BlackBerry warning there. The Toss Script is going to control how I throw this teleporter. Let me zoom in here. Alright. So I don't really need any of this stuff to start. Basically, I need a couple things. First thing I need is a public transform. And this is going to be my toss point. This is going to be from where I'm throwing the teleporter. And I need my game object. In this case, it's waffle. And that is going to be what it is that we're throwing. And we need one more thing I forgot here. We need public game object obj. This is the prefab. Alright, so basically what we're going to do is we're going to instantiate an object of this prefab of our waffle, and we're going to store it here. We're going to store it so that we don't have to instantiate it and destroy it over and over and over. We basically just want to create it once, hold on to it, and just keep rethrowing it. It's much more efficient that way. Then we're going to create our start method. And in the start method, we are just going to go ahead and instantiate our teleporter, okay? Which we need to cast as a game object. It's just how the instantiate method works. So we instantiate, and we're going to cast what we instantiate as a game object. And what are we instantiating? We're instantiating object, all right? That's all we need. And then we're just going to say waffle.setActive false. Because we haven't thrown it yet, right? There's no sense in having this waffle as an active game object. So we create it and we just turn it off real quick. Because we don't need it to do anything yet. Alright? Next, we need to set up our code to throw it. And so what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and look for mouse input. We're going to call it fire1. And we're just going to see if the player has clicked the mouse, and if so, we're going to toss the waffle. Let's see, I'm just checking through chat real quick. Talking about C#, talking about my mechanical keyboard. The first person controller does have a movement script attached. That's just part of the built-in sample assets. Cool. Okay, so I seem to be caught up there. And so we're going to have our update method. And in our update method, we're just going to say if input, dot get button down. All right, and what button are we going to look for? We're going to look for fire 1. That's a default one, and that just means left mouse button. All right, and so if the player clicks the mouse, I'm going to do a few things. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say waffle.transform.position is going to be equal to our toss point dot position. It already is a transform. Then we're going to say waffle.transform.rotation equals toss point dot rotation. All right, so that's just going to set its position and rotation. Then we're going to turn it on. Waffle dot set active true. So we enable it, and now let's throw it. Waffle dot rigid body dot add relative force. We need to make sure it's add relative force, not just add force, because we want to make sure it's relative to the object and not world coordinates. And what force? We're not going to move it along the x-axis. Let's say 5 along the y-axis and 7 along the z-axis. So it's going to kind of come up, but it's going to go mostly out. And our force mode is going to be force mode impulse. Right? So it's kind of like a chuck, right? It's not a slow-moving force. It's just we're going to hurl this. All right? We will come back here eventually because there's one more line of code we're going to need to add. But for the time being, this will enable us to throw a waffle. And isn't that what we really want? So we're going to come back here to our scene. Save your scene. I made the mistake the other day while doing a live session. I didn't save until an hour in when Unity crashed and I lost the whole thing. So save your scene. I'm going to come back to first person character and we're going to scroll down and we're going to see toss script. I'm going to grab my waffle prefab, drop it there, and I'm going to grab my first person camera and drop it there. Now, if you're using, like, say, a gun to shoot something, you'd use the tip of the gun. If you have a different controller set up, this is just sort of a guideline. I'm using the first person character controller. But you'd want to put wherever the waffle is supposed to come from goes here. Okay? And if you're not using the first person controller, then you'll have to kind of decide that for yourself. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and click play, and oop, wait a minute, lost my mouse there. Yep, I forgot one more important thing. The first person character is in our scene, so we don't need this camera. Goodbye, camera. Boop. Also, someone is talking as me in chat, so someone else from Unity must be here and logged in as my account, so that's not me talking. Who is that? Sorry, I'm just catching up on chat. Some people are asking about casting as game objects. Casting game object is much different than as game object in the sense of instancing. Nope, does the same thing. That just happens to be how I do it. Let's see here. Is this like object pooling? Is kind of right. We have a pool of 1. So yeah, we're just not using instantiate or destroy. Okay. So anyway, so I've disabled this camera now because we don't need 2 cameras in the scene. And now we've got our character, able to look around, able to run around. That's just part of the first person character controller. The first time I click my mouse, it never works because it's clicking outside here. So I will chuck a waffle. And we're missing one important item here, and you'll see what that is. The waffle is kind of flopping around. And the reason it's doing that is because eventually here we need to turn that waffle into a trigger. We don't necessarily need the collider to be an actual collider, at least with our first method. So it's kind of, when you're throwing it, since it's starting inside the player, it's sort of flopping all over the place. I just wanted to verify that throwing the waffle actually worked. So we have a waffle and it's throwable. Now we no longer need the collider on this to be a regular collider, so I'm going to come back to my prefab and I'm going to say is trigger, and I'm just going to leave it like that. Now it's just a trigger. I don't necessarily need it to be anything else. At this point, we have our waffle and we're tossing our waffle and all that. We're going to go ahead and look at the first method of managing teleportation, and that is to use a navmesh. All right. So what we can do is we can throw an object, right, and when it hits something, we can say, hey navmesh, where is the closest place that this player can get on this navmesh to the point where we actually hit. Alright, because consider what happens if the waffle lands in a place where the player can't go, right? Like a small area, a crevice, or in a corner where the player can't fit. You know, we don't want the player teleporting in and getting stuck. So we're going to use a navmesh to say, hey, this place is traversable, this place is not. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bake the nav mesh for the scene. And this is pretty simple. My scene is already all set to static. So I've clicked it. You can see that it's marked as static. I've actually already light mapped everything, which is why it looks like this. Everything is static. All right. So what I want to do is I'm just going to go to Window, Navigation, and I'm not going to mess with any of this stuff. Everything's already static. Now, if you're doing this yourself, you need to make stuff static if you want to use nav meshes. But that's part of nav meshes. That's not really part of this. And then once everything is set to navigational static, we're just going to hit Bake, and we get our nav mesh. And I don't need this window anymore. That's all I needed to do. I just needed to bake a very simple nav mesh. And now we're going to go ahead and create our waffle script. So I'll create C# script, waffle script. And I will put the waffle script on our prefab. So I'm going to click Add Component, Scripts, and Waffle Script. Boop, just like that. Alright, let's go ahead and open this up. So this code actually is fairly simple. All we're going to say is, hey, when the waffle hits something, okay, what we want to do is we want to teleport the player to the closest place to the point they can be on the nav mesh. Alright? And that code is actually fairly straightforward. So what I'm going to say is I am going to say, first off, I need a placeholder for my player. I'm going to get rid of all the stuff that's in there. So I'm going to say public, game object, player. Okay, this is going to be how, because we need to move the player to us. Alright. And then we're going to say void on trigger enter. Remember, we set the collider to a trigger now. If you haven't set it to a trigger, like I did, then this isn't going to work. And we're going to read in a collider other. And the first thing we want to say is, since we're spawning this the teleporter, this waffle, inside the player, first thing we're going to say is if other.tag equals player return. And MonoDevelop hates when I do that. I try to have it on one line, and MonoDevelop's like, no. So, sorry, MonoDevelop, I'm getting in my way. So basically, if the waffle collides with a player, just ignore it, because we don't want to be able to collide with the player, because that would be silly, because that won't do anything. So once in this case, the waffle has hit an object, all right, that is not the player, the very first thing we want to do is we want to say rigidbody.velocity equals vector3.0. We just need to zero out its velocity so it doesn't go flying all over the place, and once it teleports the player doesn't move to a place they shouldn't be able to go. So we're just zeroing out its velocity. This will also give us the ability to constantly throw the teleporter, and it won't inherently receive the velocity from previously. So for instance, if I threw the teleporter downwards, let's say off the side of a cliff, and then turned around and threw it again, if I didn't zero out the velocity, it would double or even add extra velocity, and that sucker would just go flying, right? And so we definitely don't. We want to be able to zero out our velocity when the thing lands. That's very important. Next, we're going to say navmesh hit. We're going to create a variable of type navmesh hit, which is just hit, which is just going to contain information about the closest point to the navmesh. And we're going to say if navmesh dot sample position, this is going to return true or false. It'll return true if we found a position. It'll return false if we didn't. So this is saying, hey, if I throw the teleporter and there's just no place the player can go, I'm just going to ignore it, right? If it returns true, it's going to say, hey, we found a spot, we're going to move the player there. All right. So if navmesh.sample position, and we're going to pass in transform dot position, this is where the teleporter is. So this is where the teleporter has gone. And then we're going to say out hit. Hit will contain the information about the closest spot we can go. And then we're going to have to pick some radius. How far out can it sample? Right? If it hits a brick wall, can it go 2 units in the front, 2 units, like how far can it go? We're going to say 5. We're willing to accept a valid position within 5 units of wherever the teleporter hit. This is arbitrary. You could pick whatever you want. And then finally, allowed mask is which layers or which mask of the nav mesh can we go to? I'm going to say 1, which is going to allow all of it. Okay? Because we just want to be able to teleport anywhere. All right? So basically, if this returns true, we know we found a correct position, and that correct position is stored inside hit. So at that point, all I need to do is say player.transform.position equals hit, hit dot position. That'll teleport the player there. And then finally, we need to say game object, which is the teleporter, dot set active false. Obviously, we don't need to keep the teleporter active, or else we'd have a whole bunch of glitches and whatnot. So at this point, our waffle script for the nav mesh is done. Basically, we're going to throw it, it's going to hit something that's not the player, it's going to zero out its velocity, it's going to find the closest place on the nav mesh and is going to send you there. And this system actually works really well. One thing I need to change here is we need to figure out how we're going to fill out this player, right? Because the waffle isn't created until runtime. So inside our task script, the one thing we need to do, I told you we were going to add one more line of code there, is we're going to say waffle dot get component. I should just type that out. Waffle script dot player equals game object. Ooh, there we go. So this is going to set our first person, right? Our first person camera or controller up to be the player of our waffle script. All right, so that is what gets teleported. So let's see this in action. I thought we were going to have an error because this turned red. Ah, whoops. There we go. Forgot the function parentheses there. Sorry about that. So, yeah, it's a function. Those are important. Okay, and the error should go away. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and try this out. So we're going to hit play. And I'm going to click, the first time didn't work. We're going to toss a waffle, and boop, I get teleported to the waffle. I want to come up here, so I toss the waffle up there. Now I'm up here. I can jump. If I want to go over this fence, that was a terrible throw. I'm going to jump and then throw it. There we go. Now I'm on the other side of the fence. So you can see our teleporter works with the nav mesh actually really well. So here is the positives of this. The player can only end up where they need to end up, so that's good, right? The player is guaranteed to be on the nav mesh. They're guaranteed to be on walkable land, okay? Places that they should be able to traverse, right? And there's a fair bit of accuracy. For instance, that always takes me forever to get this toss right. Oh, first try. All right, so I was able to teleport inside here. Let me see if I can get back out. Look at that. I'm getting really good at this. So we can traverse through narrow openings by throwing the teleporter through the narrow openings, and it'll put us to the other side. Here is the major drawback. The script, right, the sample position, is going to find the closest place, all right, on the nav mesh that the player can go. That doesn't always give us the most reasonable or accurate response. So for instance, here we have a wall with a little barrier. There's a crevice between the wall and the barrier, but the player can't fit in there. Okay? So obviously there's no nav mesh in there because the player can't fit in there. But when I throw the teleporter against the wall, I go to the other side. The reason I go to the other side is that when it hits the wall, the other side of the wall is closer than this portion of nav mesh here because this little barrier is here. So this isn't super accurate because it allows me to go through walls, all right? Which isn't necessarily what I want for this device. If that's what you want, then fantastic. But just know that the player can just throw at any wall sometimes and just, appear on the other side. The other problem is that this doesn't take height into account. So for instance, let me come on the other side of this wall here. If I throw this way up on the wall, when I teleport, well, that didn't work. When I teleport, I'm going to teleport automatically on the ground. I won't teleport in the air and then fall, right? So because it's looking for a piece of the nav mesh for me to be on. So the problem is twofold. Is that I can teleport through walls with it, and you will always be on the ground. You can't teleport to a higher level. Luckily, we can't teleport through the ground. That's one of the strengths of this, all right? You are unable to teleport through the ground because you will always be on top of the nav mesh. So that's this nav mesh method, okay? It's very good, it's very accurate, but it has those two major draws, right? Well, and one more major draw, nav meshes don't work in 2D. So if you're making a 2D game, you can't use this method. So three major draws. You're always on the ground, so no height, right? You can go through walls, and it doesn't work in 2D. So, but if those draws aren't a big deal for you, this is a great way to go about this. One moment, I'm going to read through chat. Luckily, we have someone from Unity here managing chat, so I don't have to read it so much. Tell you what, Adam, if someone has a question for me in chat that you're unable to handle, just message me on Skype, because you seem to have chat kind of wrapped up, so I'm just going to leave you alone with that. Okay, I'm going to save my scene. I've learned. Always save my scene. All right. And well, here's a question. You can't generate a nav mesh at runtime. That is correct. You cannot generate... I'm sure someone is going to be like, well, actually, you can. I don't believe you can generate a nav mesh at runtime, and at least not built in. There might be assets in the asset store that allow you to do that, but I do not believe that we have a method of doing that. Okay, so let's look at another way. So we have another way of managing this. So that's the nav mesh way. Now let's look at actual physicality, right? And what I mean by physicality is this. We can use the physics system to manage overlapping colliders for us. So what we can effectively do is we can add a second collider to our waffle, and that collider can be the exact same size as the player. So that when we throw our teleporter and it lands somewhere, it enables its second collider, which is the size of the player, and then we let the physics engine push that teleporter around until it settles somewhere. And once it's settled, we say, okay, now it's settled, let us put the player there. Okay, because if it's settled, that means it can physically fit there. All right, so let's look at what this method, let's take a look at what this method looks like. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new script. All right, we're going to create a new script. And someone said in chat, fourth drawback, you can't bounce your waffle off walls. You certainly can. We just made it so that as soon as it hits, it teleports us. But if we want to allow bounces, if we want to say, hey, don't teleport the player until after 5 seconds or until after its velocity reaches 0 on its own, which means it rests, you know, we could certainly do that. This is just me saying, hey, teleport right away. But I could certainly put this on a timer. No on trigger enter, just once it becomes like on enable, just invoke a method that after 3 seconds teleports the player there, wherever it happens to be. All right, so yeah, so that's not necessarily a shortcoming, that's just how we happen to be building it. Okay, and so let's go ahead and create a new script. This is just going to be new waffle script. I just want to keep the script separate so that we don't necessarily have to worry about it. And now I'm going to go to my prefab, and I'm going to say, hey, you're no longer going to have waffle script, now you're going to have new waffle script. Where are you at? New waffle script. And let's go ahead and open new waffle script. The first thing I want to be sure to do is I want to come to toss script and change it from waffle script to new waffle script, just so we know we're accessing the right one. And then I'm going to come to waffle script, and I'm actually just going to copy this because I'm lazy and I don't want to keep typing. So let's go ahead and paste it in here. So with our new waffle script, we have a couple things we need to do. We need to manage a capsule collider, which is going to be the same as our player, and we need to basically take care of when the physics engine is done messing around. So what we need to do, so we have our player first, then we need to go ahead and create ourselves a capsule collider. So I'm going to say capsule collider, which we'll call capsule. In this case, it's a capsule collider. If my player happened to be a mesh, I might do a mesh collider. If my player was a square, I'd do a box collider. The first person character controller just happens to be a capsule collider, so that's the one I'm doing. Capsule collider, and then I need to know if it's been thrown. So bool tossed equals false. That's an important one so that we know we've actually thrown it, because when we first enable it, it's already at rest, and we don't want to be like, hey, it's at rest, so it hasn't been tossed yet, so there's a real problem there. All right, and so now that we have that, our on trigger enter is going to change a little bit. So instead of all this stuff right here, we don't need any of that. We're just going to say, you know, we don't want to hit the player. We do want to zero out our velocity. All right, and then we want to say tossed equals true. All right, tossed equals true and capsule dot enabled equals true, because that's going to turn on our capsule collider. Okay, so we're going to say yes, it's been thrown. We're turning on our capsule collider. That's the end of our on trigger enter. Now the real magic is going to happen in a different function, and that's going to be on or void on collision stay. Our capsule collider is not a trigger. It's going to be a physical collider, which means the physics engine is going to push it around, right? So we're going to say on collision stay, and we'll just do collision call. This is when two colliders are touching each other, right? So on collision stay, we're going to say if tossed. So if we have tossed the object, okay, and it's not just some other issue going on here, we're going to say tossed equals false, okay, we're turning that portion back on. we're going to say player.transform.position equals transform.position. So we're going to move the player to our teleporter. All right. We're going to turn our capsule back off. And then we're going to turn our game object off. All right. So basically we're saying, hey, physics engine, move it around once we've settled, so our on collision state, which will generally happen after 1 or 2 frames of physics, right? We're going to say, hey, okay, is it tossed? If it's tossed, it's no longer tossed. We're to move the player here, then reset everything. All right. So that's all we need to do with our new waffle script. We do need to modify our prefab to make use of this. So let's come back to our prefab. And what our prefab needs is it needs a capsule collider. So I'm going to click Add Component, Physics Capsule Collider. It's not a trigger, but it is disabled. It's very important that you uncheck. We don't want it enabled to start. It only becomes enabled once it's hit the ground or hit something, all right? And then we're going to leave its center the way it is, its radius the way it is, and the height is going to be 2 because that's what the height of the player is. See, if you click on the player, capsule collider 0, 0, 0.5, and 2. So that's what we want for our waffle. Okay, because we want it to have the exact same size and dimensions of the player so that we know when the player can go there without getting stuck. All right, so let's take a look at this. Let's go ahead and run it. And again, I'll click, it's not going to work, and then I'll throw the waffle, and we might see an issue. We just saw an issue, okay? And I'll show you how to fix that. So we're going to throw it again, and actually, you know what? Let's do this. Let's go to our waffle script here, and let's go ahead and set its height to 0.4. That should fix that. I'm getting this null reference error, but I think that was just because I didn't have my collider. So we're actually seeing the first problem, and I was going to hoping to have a successful illustration before I showed you the non-working illustration, unless I missed something. Wait a minute, let me go to my console here. Collider, other, new waffle script, line 17. Oh, I did. I missed a very important part. I'm sorry about that. So void start. I forgot to say capsule. I forgot to set up what capsule was. Equals get component capsule collider. I blame the people in chat for not telling me. That's my fault. No, it's their fault. Yeah. So we forgot to set, or I forgot to set up what the capsule collider was, so that when we enabled it, it knew what I was talking about. So that was my issue there. But let me, it actually, I've kind of alluded to another error that we're going to have, and I'm going to show you what that is and how to fix it. So let's go ahead and try this again. It should work this time without any hitches. It doesn't. That's fine, because I want to talk to you about why it didn't just work. So I've just thrown a waffle. Ooh, I threw that waffle way high. So we have an issue here. There we go. Yeah. The issue with this method is this, is that I'm tossing the waffle and I'm using real physics. And the problem is with the wall, it works fine. And with the floor, it works fine. If I toss it over here, it works fine. The problem is the floor. Okay? Sometimes it works on the floor and sometimes it doesn't. That's an expected behavior because the floor has a mesh collider on it. Not only does it have a mesh collider on it, it has a one-dimensional mesh collider on it. Not really one, I'm sorry, not one-dimensional, two-dimensional flat mesh collider on it. Which means that this teleporter can go right through it, all right, without better collision detection. And we can increase the accuracy of our collision detection by going to waffle and setting our collision detection to be continuous. We can also increase our physics step, but the problem consists of mesh colliders are fairly difficult to collide with, right? Sometimes they work, and sometimes, like that right there, they didn't work, or they took a little while to work, or you fall through the floor, all right? So what I mean to say is this. If you don't have any mesh colliders in your scene, like if I take all of our floors, and I take their mesh collider and I make them convex, or I just replace the whole thing with a box collider, okay? That problem goes away. Okay, now I should be able to collide just fine with everything. I won't have any issues. All right, and unlike our navmesh with its chat issues, all right, I won't teleport through a wall. I can't teleport through a wall. It's just not going to happen. All right, so I don't have that issue. All right, I can still come through here if I throw it right. Yay! All right, I'm getting really good at that. All right, so except that time. And, as you just saw there, we can actually use the teleporter to give us some verticality, right? So if I hit a wall up high, I'll teleport to that position, then fall naturally. Well, if I can manage it. There we go. And then fall naturally, right? So I can use the teleporter to gain height. So the places where this is better than the nav mesh is that I won't accidentally teleport through walls, okay, which is nice. I don't want to be accidentally teleporting through walls. And I can gain height, and this works in 2D. Now, of course, I use some 3D physics stuff, like the capsule collider and stuff, but if you just replace them with their 2D counterparts, this all works, and this works in 2D. So the strengths of this are kind of the weaknesses of navmesh. The weakness of this is pretty big. If you use non-convex mesh colliders, a lot of times it doesn't work. Alright, so in this case, our floor is a mesh collider. It didn't work until I made it convex, or I could have just replaced it with a cube. Alright, that's kind of a pretty big drawback, but if your game doesn't have mesh colliders, right, then you don't have to worry about it, and this is a much more accurate way of going about it, because it will physically kind of cram and place the player where they need. Alright, so again, you know, just kind of some of the fixes and stuff like that. So this one's strengths, right, are that, again, we can gain verticality, you know, we don't necessarily need to have a nav mesh base, so we can use it in 2D and stuff like that. Let's look at a third way. And this third way, I'll undo this convex here. The third way to do it is the most accurate out of all of them. Okay, but again, just like anything else, it has a drawback. And we'll take a look to see what that drawback is. Let me see real quick here. I haven't read through chat because Adam's been managing chat, but let me just take a quick look to make sure everything's in there. Let's see here. Question, how can I change the gravity of an object by script? Physics gravity should be accessible via scripting, so you can do that. If you're talking about an object's gravity, you can, if it's 2D, you can then change its rigid body's gravity factor, or you can just apply a downward force to it. There's probably a few different ways. Changing the mass will sort of have an effect, but that may not be actually changing the gravity of it. But yeah, changing the mass will affect how force affects it. Yeah. Let's see here. Cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this third method. And the third method, like I said, the most accurate method, all right, but it does have a drawback. So I'm going to come back to scripts here, and I'm going to create a new script, and this one's going to be final waffle script. I'm just going to illustrate our third method. And we obviously will need to go ahead and change that player script again. So I'm going to come back here to my prefab, my waffle, and I'm going to change this from new waffle script to final waffle script. Right there. Okay, so we need to have that final waffle script on there. And in this case, what we're going to do is we are going to turn on our capsule collider. We are going to set it as a trigger. And we are going to remove our box collider. In this case, I'll just deactivate it. That's fine too. But I'm turning off the box collider. Okay, so the capsule collider becomes on, and a trigger, box collider goes away. Okay, let me go into scripts. I'll open final waffle script. There we go. Let me first come back into toss script and change new to final. I had thought about before doing this tutorial about using inheritance so I didn't have to keep changing this, but then I thought that would be an extra level of complexity that would really only save me from one line of code, so it really didn't seem worth it. So here inside the final waffle script, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say public game object player. This is our player. And I'm going to say void on trigger enter collider other. I'm going to say if other.tag equals player. I could have just copy pasted this, but I felt like typing it. I don't even know why. I'm going to put it down here. It's still going to go weird. I don't know why it does that. It drives me nuts. So if it's not other, or if it's not the player, I'm going to rigid body dot velocity equals vector3 dot 0. I know this is all repeat, but it's good practice. Keep your fingers strong. All right, you want to be able to tear phone books. That's how you do it. And so all we're going to do is we're just going to say player dot position or transform dot position equals transform dot position. Notice how I'm not doing any checks. I'm not finding a place in the nav mesh. I'm not checking to see if the player can fit, right? Is basically what I'm saying, right? I'm not doing any checks at all. All I'm doing is saying, hey, if this hits something, move the player there, all right? And then game object.setActive false. The reason I can safely do this is that the collider on the teleporter is the same size as the player, which means it cannot go any place the player cannot go. I don't have to check to make sure if the player can fit. They couldn't have gotten there if the player couldn't fit. All right? That's just kind of how it is, right? That's why this is the simplest method. I'm going to throw an object that has a collider on it the same size as the player. And we will see that it works perfectly. All right? I'll go ahead and hit play. Oh, I forgot one more problem with the other method, not the nav mesh, but the physics method, is if I had kept clicking the ground, I could have actually thrown myself through the ground. If you just keep clicking, I can actually go through the ground. I can't with this method, but I could have with the other one. I forgot to show you that. So that's just kind of another drawback of that. But we'll see. We can toss it up here, and we go up here. We can toss it at this wall. We will not teleport through the wall. Okay, we can toss it over here. So this works great. Ooh, well, helps if I jump and then throw it. This would be easier with crosshairs, but I don't have any crosshairs. Ooh, I've never gotten up here. That's fun. But we still get our height, and then we fall naturally. So this seems to work the best of all three, except it has a couple major drawbacks. The first is if your player is really big, throwing an object with a collider on it the size of the player isn't really all that great, right? Because it's going to hit everything, right? Which kind of alludes to the second problem. I can no longer throw it through skinny openings. I cannot throw this collider through that hole, right? Oh, I managed to get on top of it. That's fun. The collider's too big, okay? So, since it's the same size as the player, I can no longer throw the collider through a narrow opening and appear on the other side, like I could with the other two methods. So that's the major drawback of this one. Throwing a large collider through a small opening, it's not going to work, okay? So that's our third method. Our third method is just throwing a giant collider, okay? Now, there are ways to shore up the shortcomings of each of these methods, but it requires a lot more complexity, and it depends entirely on your game. More or less, if you want to teleport in your game, one of these methods will probably work 99% of the times based on the criteria of your game. All right, so, another point of this whole session is just to show you there's a lot of ways to achieve the same thing. And there's no one, way, there's no one process that's going to be perfect and it's going to be exactly the only way to do it. No system, no process is perfect. There's always issues with one or another or whatever, right? So, and as someone pointed out, if you wanted to make the teleporter bounce or slide before you actually teleported there, it's really simple. I've just been basically saying on trigger enter. But if I wanted to have the ability to throw the teleporter and then, excuse me, sorry about that. If I wanted to have the ability to throw the teleporter, I could, in on trigger enter, say, hey, start a timer, and then after 3 seconds, then teleport the player there, right? Or whatever. Just come up with some system that works for that. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be this way. Furthermore, someone was asking, how do we, say, blow up an enemy, like my original picture, this picture right here, how would we achieve something like this? Basically, all we really need to do is, when we teleport, just do an on collision enter of the player, find and see if it is in an enemy, right? On collision enter will ring true, or be called, basically, if you're inside an enemy, and say, hey, if that's true, blow that sucker up, and play some particle effect, death animation, whatever, and blow the guy to pieces. It's actually fairly simple to do. Okay, real quick here, I'm going to read chat. We're kind of wrapping up now. Let's see here. Sorry about that. Apologize. Questions about coroutines. Let's see here. Can this be used in multiplayer without teleporting everyone? Yeah. It's only going to teleport the local, whoever threw it, right? Unless you happen to try to sync that over the network, which would be kind of weird. But yes, that will only happen. That won't teleport everybody. It'll just teleport whoever is the player that happened to have thrown it. Let's see here. So So what about teleporting without throwing? Invisible followed object works with the same script. I'm not entirely certain what you mean by that. Obviously, we could teleport to anything, really. It's just a matter of changing the position of the player. But I don't know what you mean by invisible followed objects work the same way. Let's see here. Yeah, telefragging was always my favorite part of the Unreal Tournament series. I didn't even use weapons. I just used teleporters and tried to blow people up with them. Let's see. So IGWB says, how about adding 2 colliders, one the size of the player and one the size of the waffle, then always store the last position of the player collider hit and teleport to it as soon as the waffle collider hit. That's kind of like our second method. So that's pretty much kind of what you're talking about there. With the 2 colliders, the one collider kind of triggers the other collider to settle a position. Alright, let's see what we're doing on time. We're actually 9 minutes early. So actually, I was going fast because I was trying to cover all 3 in the allotted time, and it turns out I went too fast and ended early. So I appreciate you all taking time away from E3 and your busy lives to come hang out and watch this video. Hopefully it's been useful. Maybe even if you didn't learn anything, at least you got inspired to try to build some telefragging or something like that, or maybe it made you hungry for waffles. You know, that's fine too. We all like waffles. Alright, wait. Instead of the on trigger enter, if the waffle has a rigid body, could you then teleport once the waffle's velocity has zeroed out, like when it comes to rest? Absolutely. You could certainly do that. Oboe Shape asked that, and basically, yeah, that's basically, if I didn't want to use the on trigger enter, I could just use an actual collider and let it come to rest and then teleport there. The problem with that is that once it came to rest, I would still need to do a method like the navmesh or the collider or something so that I didn't get teleported into an area I could not go, right? So throwing an object then moving to that object's position is simple. The difficulty comes in making sure the player doesn't get stuck in a wall, right? And that's what these 3 methods are meant to solve. Let's see. Explosion time. Yeah. I wish I had an explosion. I don't even have an explosion prefab or texture, or else I'd do something, but I don't have anything. We could always put a particle effect in front of the camera, makes it look all tingly so the player's teleporting. Let's see here. I concur with Zenatulin. Can you have it only teleport when the user presses a second button? Let's see here. Yes. Let's try to do it with this right here. So the question is, can we make it so a second button will then actually make you teleport, right? And actually, let's do that with the first one here. So the navmesh one, I think that'll be the simplest one to do this with. So let's say that we are going to, let's create a bool, at rest equals false, and a bool called tossed equals false. Okay, and so basically what we're going to do is on trigger enter. I don't know, well, actually, you know what? We don't, I don't know that we need at rest. I think we can do this without. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, excuse me again, sorry about that. I'm going to say void update. We're going to have an update here, and I'm going to say if input.get button down. Let's make this fire 2, which is our right mouse button. Fire 2. So if the player has hit the second mouse button, okay, and tossed. So if it's been tossed, we don't want to be able to teleport if it hasn't been tossed, right? What I'm going to say is I'm going to say this bit of code here. Well, first I'm going to say tossed equals false, and I'm going to do this bit right there. So on trigger enter, all that's going to do for me is it's going to zero out the velocity. And we wouldn't even necessarily need to do that if we wanted to like slide along the ground. But this is a trigger, so we don't necessarily want that. Ooh, that's right. This is a trigger. So let's make this instead of a trigger. Now I'm just messing. I'm just gonna play with everything, aren't I? I would want to do something along the lines of, well, first off, we're going to say that tossed equals true. That's important. To say that we have thrown it. And actually, let's do this. Let's just say void on enable. Tossed equals true. I think we can just do this. So basically, as soon as the waffle becomes enabled, we're going to say, hey, it's been tossed. Okay? Sorry about that again. Excuse me. So once it's enabled, we're going to say it has been tossed. And then in our update, we're going to say, hey, if we hit the left mouse button and it's been tossed, then we're going to say tossed equals false. And we're going to find where on the navmesh. This way it will enable us to even throw it in the air and then teleport in the air. And then we'll set the game object to false. Next time we set the game object to true or activated, tossed will become true again, meaning that we knew that we've thrown it. This should work, and then all we really need to do is we need to set this back to be waffle script, come back to our scene. Sorry if you guys are talking in chat. I'm completely ignoring you because I'm kind of like in a mind think right now. Come back to prefabs here. What we'll do is we'll turn the box collider back on, caps the collider off. We'll change the script to waffle script. And we will turn it to be not a trigger. But here's the important thing, is it's still going to collide with the player. So what I need to do is I need to modify my toss script. Where's my toss? Oh, my toss script to, instead of putting it to toss position, which will cause a collision, what we need to do is say vector3 dot pause equals toss point dot position. Then we need to say pause dot z plus equals 1, and then we will set it to pause. It'll be throwing in front of the player now, so it won't clip. Hopefully, I might have to do like 1.5, but that should be okay. If we come back here, I have no idea if this is going to work. We're going to go ahead and hit play. So far, no errors. That's a good sign. I'm going to throw it. Well, it did come to a standstill. You can see it's kind of floating too. Oh, that's right. Right mouse trigger. Or right mouse button. I forgot that that's how I teleported myself. And there we go. So I throw it. Boom, teleport. Right mouse. Throw it. Oh, here we go. Throw it in the air. Did I throw it in the air? Where did? Oh, wait. Throw it. Teleport while it's in the air. Right? Pretty neat, huh? One of the problems there is that I'm not zeroing out my velocity. So let's do, oh, this is important. On our waffle script, let's say void on disable. This is where we're going to say, not ping, I don't know why it said that. Rigid body dot velocity equals vector3.0. That's going to prevent the velocity from building up, which is why when I threw it forward, it went backwards, because it still had a backwards velocity to it. So, yeah, throw it, right click, boom, throw it, right click, boom. It's actually way more fun than it just randomly happening. I should have just done this from the start. Thanks for whoever recommended that. There we go, let it in there, and I'm just going to go, see ya, peace out, yo, and then boom. Oh, that's so much fun. Okay. I should have just done that from the start. Let me read chat here, because I should have done that. Let's see here. Could you use this as a respawn place when you die if you change when to teleport after you die? Absolutely. Let's see here. Some people are still talking about coroutines. What's the folder's structure or best practice to structure a project? The correct answer is really whichever works for you, right, and your team. But I like to just have like items in their own folders, prefabs and prefabs, scripts and scripts, scenes, so on and so forth. Some people like it different, but that's how I do it. I don't know that there's necessarily best practice. Let's see here. What if we fire multiple waffles, then click fire 2? If you were to say throw 3 waffles and then click mouse fire 2, it'll do all 3 of those, and you'll end up in whatever position was the last waffle. And it'll happen instantly, so you won't even see it. So it'll be kind of a waste, right? You'll throw 3, it'll just boop, boop, and you'll be at the last one, and you won't even know it. Let's see here. Can you... Oh, sorry. That's Adam talking. Well, right now we're only throwing the same waffle, so you couldn't throw multiples. But if you were to somehow make it so you could throw 3, it would have no effect. Let's see here. Oh, and I gotta catch up to chat. And that's just Adam typing a lot. Okay, cool. All right, that was actually pretty fun. I really wish I had started with the right click to teleport. That's actually pretty cool. What are you going to do? That's actually how it worked in Unreal Tournament, too. I can't believe I forgot that. Anyway, I'll have to make an annotation so people don't stop my video early thinking, oh, he's just going to chat for a while, and actually know that there's something useful at the end there. Stick with the bakery theme. Is bakery the new explosions? Like, we're done blowing things up, now we're going to have bakery items? Though we could always blow up bakery items. That would work, too. Alright, so I think we're going to wrap up here, because now we've gone the allotted time, and I don't want to hold people up, and our attendance is starting to dwindle anyway. So thank you all for attending. Thank you. Hopefully you've gotten some great ideas about teleporters. I certainly appreciate you hanging around and skipping E3. As always, any questions, comments, concerns, whatever, hit us up on Twitter. That's where we hang out. At Unity3D, at Mike Geig, which is me, at Will Goldstone, and at The Ant Ranch, which is Adam, who is in chat. And yeah, I want you all to have a fantastic day. Enjoy your E3. Have a great week. I will hang out and chat for a little while longer if you want to ask me some questions there. Otherwise, you have a fantastic day.